Hello and welcome to the Athlete Archives. Baseball players come from all walks of life and have the same problems everyone else has. They aren't all great men. I stumbled onto today's athlete while reading Bill James' historical baseball abstract. And let me warn you now, the story of Marty Bergen is not a pleasant one. He clearly had some mental illness and things ended violently. So why tell such a grim story? Well, I stumbled onto this story and began researching him in May, which happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month. And just like my earlier episode on Jimmy Pearsall, I think it's important to raise awareness of mental health struggles. In Pearsall's case, he was hospitalized, treated, and led a healthy life with medication for his bipolar disorder. In Bergen's case, his behavior was continually dismissed, and when he asked for help from his doctor and his priest, he was ignored. The end result was horrific. Marty Bergen was born on October 25, 1871, in North Brookfield, Massachusetts. Like many players at the turn of the century, his parents came to the U.S. from Ireland in 1865 at the end of the Civil War. Marty was the third of 6 children, with his younger brother Bill being the only other boy. Both boys would play professional baseball. Both were catchers, and both were considered excellent at their position. Growing up just outside of Boston, Marty began playing locally and then joined Salem of the New England League in 1892 as a professional. He played in 1893 for the Wilkes-Barre Coal Barons and then was signed by the Pittsburgh Pirates, now managed by one of his former teammates, Connie Mack. The Pirates sent Marty to Lewiston of the New England League for 1894. Between his season with the Coal Barons and signing with the Pirates, Bergen met Harriet Gaines and they married in 1893. The Bergens were quick to start a family. They had 3 children, one in 1894, another in 1895, and a third a couple years later. In the meantime, the family bought a farm dubbed Snowball Farm on Boynton Street in North Brookfield. While Harriet was busy with the kids, Marty was playing ball, and at the end of the 1894 season, his contract with the Pirates was voided on a technicality, and Marty wound up with the Kansas City Cowboys for 1895. Marty did not fit in well with team president Jimmy Manning. In the middle of the season, apparently over some supposed slight, Bergen just disappeared from the team for a week. He and Manning continued to clash, and at the end of the season, despite hitting .372, the Cowboys had had enough. Marty was then signed by the Boston Beaneaters of the National League. Today, this is the Atlanta Braves. Bergen took some convincing to continue playing ball. Beaneaters team owner Arthur Soden made a trip to visit Bergen at home to convince the temperamental player that he was wanted, and it worked. Marty would play the next 4 years for the Beaneaters, and he would play well. The Sporting News called him, quote, the greatest throwing catcher the game has ever produced. Connie Mack, a catcher himself, stated that Marty was the only catcher he'd seen gun down a base stealer at second from his knees. But unfortunately, with that greatness came a lot of baggage. He did not get along with any of his teammates, and according to Brian McKenna of SABR, Bergen was often the topic of trade rumors because of his, quote, moodiness, melancholy, inability to mesh with teammates, and a penchant for sulking and leaving the club. I don't think anyone could foresee what he was going to do. He reportedly had a temper and showed signs of anxiety and stress as a teenager, but who doesn't at that age? As Brian McKenna documents in 1891, his first professional season, he engaged in a brutal fistfight with one of his teammates. During his time in Boston, Bergen had several run-ins with teammates and opponents. Newspapers commonly referred to his erratic behavior, describing him as sullen and silent, and highlighting his moodiness, aloofness, and inaccessibility. Then things took on a bit more serious tone. Near the end of the 1898 season, Bergen threatened his teammates after an altercation on the bench. He declared that he would, quote, clubbed them to death at the end of the season. My gosh. Then the Nebraska State Journal ran a story about Bergen slapping teammate Vic Willis in the face for having the audacity to sit down at Bergen's table in a hotel dining room. Clearly, something wasn't right. In July of 1899, Bergen went AWOL from the team on a road trip, and according to one reporter, quote, his grievances are fanciful. Of a moody disposition, he imagines that his fellow players are leagued against him and are intent on bringing about his downfall. The contrary is the case. Manager Selly, I believe I have that right, and his players have treated the great backstop with unusual consideration. Bergen claimed that teammates were openly rooting against him. He had delusional thoughts about his teammates and manager working against him. He was angry at his manager. He repeatedly threatened his own teammates. Some didn't want to return to Boston after the season because of him. A few even said they didn't feel safe around him. Captain Duffy more than once said that he was afraid Bergen was going to attack him with a bat. Marty continued to harass his manager and ask for time off. Then in 1899, Bergen's 5-year-old son died from diphtheria while he was away playing baseball. This seems to have broken Marty. When he returned to the club, he claimed that his teammates continuously and maliciously reminded him of his son, causing him a great deal of stress. Unhappy, Bergen went AWOL again in September. He simply went home for a few days, complaining of a sore hand. In the off-season, Marty had hip surgery in January of 1899 for an abscess. After the hip surgery, it seemed that his paranoid delusions overwhelmed him. His doctor, Dr. Dion, heard from family, friends, and neighbors that Bergen was acting wild. When the doctor visited, he found Marty pacing in front of his house. Bergen, in tears, confessed to Dr. Dion that he had, quote, strange ideas, and said he was afraid that he was not right in the head. Marty admitted that he couldn't remember much about the past baseball season. All he remembered was that a man came up to him after his last game, congratulated him on a fine performance, and gave him a cigar. But Bergen was afraid to smoke the cigar because he believed it was poison. He was also concerned that his doctor and his wife were trying to poison him. He refused to take any medicine they gave him if he didn't first mix it himself. Bergen believed that the National League had found out that Dr. Dion was his doctor, and that they had paid Dion to kill him. He described being frightened of his teammates, feeling that they were out to kill him. He said that he always sat sideways on the bench, in the clubhouse, and on trains, in case his teammates decided to attack. He wished he had quit baseball so he could find some peace. He also believed that people in general, including the Boston team and other National League players, were continually plotting against him. Bergen also confided in his pastor that he believed himself to be insane and feared his own actions. He asked his pastor for help, but none was forthcoming from the priest, his doctor, his family, or his community. So tragic. Tragic because on January 19, 1900, Bergen awoke at home. He removed the ashes from the heating stove from the previous night, and then for some unknown reason, he snapped. He retrieved his axe and went back into his bedroom. He stood over the bed and struck his wife repeatedly on the head over and over with the axe. Marty then turned and buried the axe into the head of his 3-year-old son. His 6-year-old daughter, Florence, must have run into the kitchen, where apparently she was cornered as her father slaughtered her with the same bloody axe. Bergen then retrieved a razor blade, stood before a mirror, pulled the blade across his throat, almost severing his head from the body. I feel like I should pause here and let that sink in. The guy who asked for help from his doctor and his priest knew something was wrong. No help came, and then he woke up one morning and butchered everyone he loved. Connie Mack, manager of the Milwaukee team, and William Hamilton, the center fielder of Boston, were the only professional players present at the funeral that was held a week later. Sadly, it was Marty Bergen's father that discovered the brutal scene. As Sabre biographer McKenna states, quote, "After the terrible murders, Dr. Dion commented that Bergen was insane and a maniac. The doctor believed that the situation was out of his control and out of his purview. In the wake of the tragedy, North Brookfield made efforts to better educate professionals in the community about mental health issues." It's not clear what those efforts were. Fortunately, in the 123 years since this took place, we've definitely come a long way towards not only recognizing mental health concerns, but in treating it and also destigmatizing those who face it. That's the wrap on the tragic story of Marty Bergen. Thank you, and take care.